My grandmother always said the Valley of Oakhaven kept its secrets close. I never understood what she meant, not really, until I inherited her small, drafty cottage nestled amongst the ancient, gnarled trees. The air here was different, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something I couldn't quite place, like old wood smoke and distant rain. The village itself was small, a cluster of stone and timber homes gathered around a winding river, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and newcomers were rare. I'd arrived in late autumn, the leaves already a rite of russet and gold, falling like quiet sighs. It was peaceful, yes, but beneath that calm, I felt a peculiar tension, an unspoken agreement amongst the residents that I, as an outsider, was not yet privy to. I spent my first few weeks unpacking, exploring the woods, and trying to decipher the strange, hushed way the villagers spoke of the river, always with a glance towards its shimmering surface, as if expecting something to rise. One crisp morning, while clearing out the overgrown garden behind the cottage, I unearthed something peculiar. It was a stone, smooth and river-worn, but unlike any I'd seen before. It wasn't just a rock, it was painted. A single, stylized eye stared out from its grey surface, a deep, unsettling black pupil ringed by white. It was crudely done, yet undeniably purposeful. It felt cool in my hand, strangely heavy. I remembered seeing similar stones, now that I thought about it, tucked into crevices of the old stone wall that lined the riverbank, and even on windowsills of some of the older houses. I'd dismissed them as local folk art, a quaint tradition, but this one, clutched in my hand, felt different. It hummed with a quiet energy, or perhaps that was just my imagination. I cleaned it off, the painted eye seeming to follow my movements, and placed it on the kitchen counter, a curious relic from my new home. That evening, old Mrs. Albright, my nearest neighbor, came by with a pie, a customary welcome. She was a woman of few words, her eyes sharp and knowing. As I set the pie down, her gaze fell upon the painted stone on my counter. Her smile, thin and polite, vanished. Her lips pressed into a tight line. "You found one," she said, her voice softer than usual, almost a whisper. "Best to put it back where it came from, child. Or if it insists on staying, keep it out of sight." She wouldn't elaborate. Despite my gentle probing, she just shook her head, her gaze fixed on the stone. "It's not for looking at, not for long, not for strangers." The air in my kitchen grew suddenly cold, despite the warmth of the simmering tea kettle. Mrs. Albright left soon after, her usual brisk walk replaced by a hesitant shuffle, her eyes darting back towards my house as she went. The next morning, I couldn't shake Mrs. Albright's words. I walked the village, noticing the stones now with new eyes. They were everywhere, once you knew to look, nestled in flower beds, half buried near doorways, even one tucked into the hollow of an ancient oak by the general store. Always the same stylized eye, sometimes faded, sometimes vibrant, but always watching. It wasn't just folk art, it was a pervasive, unspoken custom. As I lingered near the river, I saw a young girl, no older than 10, carefully placing a freshly painted stone on a smooth boulder near the water's edge. She hummed a low, tuneless melody, her small fingers tracing the painted eye as if it were a cherished pet. When she finished, she backed away slowly, her head bowed, never turning her back to the river. It was a ritual, I realized, not just a decoration, a ward, perhaps, against something in the water. My curiosity, a dangerous trait I inherited from my grandmother, refused to be silenced. I began to ask around, subtly at first. The general store owner, Mr. Hemlock, a kindly man with a perpetually flower-dusted apron, grew uncomfortable when I brought up the stones. He mumbled something about old ways and keeping the river content. Young Thomas, who delivered fresh milk, simply shivered and changed the subject. No one would openly discuss them, but the fear was palpable, a quiet undercurrent in every conversation. It was then I started noticing their absence. No children played by the river's edge, not beyond a certain, well-defined line. No one swam, no one fished. The river, the lifeblood of the valley, was treated with a reverent, fearful distance. One evening, I found an old journal in a forgotten box in the attic, tucked away beneath dusty linens. It was my grandmother's, her elegant cursive filling the brittle pages. She had been a scholar of local folklore, I now remembered. The entries grew sparse, then frantic, as she wrote about Oakhaven. She wrote of the river's eye, a legend about a sentient entity in the water, demanding payment, demanding vigilance. It craved attention, she'd written, and if it didn't receive it, it would take it. The painted stones, she explained, were offerings, wards, a constant, visible acknowledgement, a sign that the village remembered, that they were watching too. But there was a line, a crucial detail, that made my blood run cold. The river's eye must never see its own reflection in the stones. The eye must always be watched, never watch itself. I ran to the kitchen, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The stone, the one I'd found. I'd polished it, set it on the polished countertop. The reflective surface of the counter acted like a mirror, a dark, gleaming pool. My grandmother's words echoed, never see its own reflection. I looked down. The painted eye on the stone was staring back at its own image, duplicated perfectly in the dark sheen of the counter. It wasn't just watching, it was watching itself. A cold, metallic scent filled the air, like iron and wet earth. A low thrum began, not just in the stone, but in the very foundations of the house. The windows rattled faintly. I reached for the stone, intending to snatch it away, to hide it, but my fingers froze inches above its surface. The painted eye seemed to pulse, a faint, sickly white light emanating from its black pupil. The thrumming intensified, vibrating through the floorboards, up my legs. The kitchen light flickered. I heard a new sound then, a sound I would forever associate with utter despair, a wet, slithering scrape coming from the river, growing closer, closer, like something immense dragging itself across the land. The painted eye on the stone was no longer pulsing with light. It was an obsidian void, deep and absolute, reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. Then, slowly, the reflection on the counter began to ripple. Not the stone's reflection, but the surface of the counter itself, as if it were turning to liquid. From within that ink-eye depth, another eye, larger, wetter, and utterly devoid of mercy, slowly opened and met my gaze. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move, I could only stare into the void that was now staring back, a void that had been waiting patiently, acknowledged but never truly seen, until now. The valley had kept its secrets, and now it was collecting its payment from the one who had finally, foolishly, opened the river's eye to itself. Thank you for listening. If this story found you in the dark, subscribe and turn on notifications. A new tale waits every night.